Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie. I'm a book-loving, notebook-hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. And this is the Get Literate podcast. On this podcast, we explore the power of leading literate lives. We talk all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to make our lives better. And no matter what better means to you, the pages inside books and notebooks can help us get there. So, each week, we'll mix together books, notebooks, mindful practices, and creativity to cultivate a life we love. Now, grab a notebook and your TBR list, and let's get literate. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Get Literate podcast. On this podcast, we often talk about a lot of whimsical topics, like books that will send us running to the stationery store, books that can help us celebrate that Seinfeld holiday called Festivus, and books that will make us hungry. We also have some writing whimsy. We talk about our notebook love languages. We get involved in some fun journaling challenges. And of course, we share our favorite journaling and notebooking supplies too. But we do also talk about some serious things on this bookish podcast as well, like books that will help you when you get a diagnosis, notebook prompts that will help bring you clarity in life, or books that act like what the HE double hockey sticks books that'll change your perspective. Today is a more serious kind of day. This week, if you are listening to this live, is National Eating Disorder Awareness Week. Now, if you're listening to this, you are likely a woman, except my dad. Hi, Dad. But you're likely a woman who has been connected to an eating disorder in some way. And that's not just to say that only women are impacted by eating disorders, but if you're listening to this, my audience demographic says that you're likely a woman. And that means that maybe you yourself has experienced disordered eating or an actual eating disorder. Maybe you know or love someone who is struggling with an eating disorder. Or maybe you've just heard about someone with an eating disorder, secondhand, or someone in the media. The statistics of eating disorders are startling. An eating disorder, whether that's anorexia or bulimia or any number of the classifications, eating disorders impact 9% of the population. And while that might not seem like a very steep percentage, that means almost 30 million Americans are dealing with an eating disorder. And I don't mean just women, but that's a very scary number. Less than 6% of those people are considered underweight. So the old myth that you only have an eating disorder if you are too thin is completely wrong and out the window. If you know someone in your family that has an eating disorder, you have a 28 to 74% greater risk of developing an eating disorder in your own life. And that eating disorder is the second deadliest mental illness, second only to opioid overdose. There are shockingly over 10,000 deaths related to eating disorders each year. There is one death every 52 minutes. And 26% of people with an eating disorder attempt suicide. And these statistics, well, they worsen when we think about eating disorders and Black, Indigenous, people of color. They're less likely to be asked how they're doing. They're less likely to be identified with an eating disorder, which means they are less likely to be supported and treated as well. These statistics are shocking. And I'm no exception to any of them. I do know someone with an eating disorder who I care about very much. I do know what can happen when you are overly obsessed with what you eat and how you feel and how that can spiral quickly out of control. Now, I am not a therapist. I am not a mental health professional. And if this is something that you are struggling with, or you are struggling to care for someone you love who is struggling, then I urge you to reach out to the proper kinds of supports. There are all sorts of support groups, therapy groups, doctors, mental health practitioners, coaches, all sorts of things available for you if this is a struggle. But why am I here today then talking about it if I am not any of those things? Well, I have joined the National Eating Disorder Awareness Week, the association, as a collaborator to help spread the word about this week, about this disease, far beyond this week of the month. How will I do that? I'll do it through books, right? That's how I make a difference. That's how I feel like I can contribute. That's how I feel like I can help. And so today, I am sharing books that explore the role of eating disorders. And you might be thinking, really, Stephanie, how can simply sharing a few titles help in this very steep, very uphill, very frightening battle? Well, because I believe that books help people and places and concepts feel seen. And if we feel seen, then we can feel better understood. And if we can feel better understood, then we know what we need to be supported. Can't provide effective support for people with eating disorders or for those that care for them if we don't know what we don't know, if we truly don't understand what those perspectives are like. And as you know, books help us know. They help us step into the shoes of someone else experiencing something much different than we are. If we think about what books can do for us, I love always to go back to Dr. Rudine Sims Bishops, who talks about books as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. Books as mirrors help us see our own lives reflected in the pages of the book. They help us feel seen. Books as windows help us see a life much different than our own. And books as sliding glass doors literally transport us into the world of that story so that we can develop empathy. That's what I'm hoping this collection of books does. Maybe it helps you feel seen because you're struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder yourself. Maybe it gives you a glimpse into what someone you love is dealing with, and it gives you a different perspective. Or maybe it actually gives you a deeper empathy, and it gives you a space, a spark, a possibility of what you might do in order to be a better support. That's what I'm hoping this collection of books does, right? We can only control what we can control. And we may not be able to control those frightening statistics right now, but one small thing that I could do to help this week is share books that might be a mirror, a window, and a sliding glass door for someone with or someone who supports an eating disorder. And that's what I'm here to do today. Bit heavier topic, but definitely needed. So let's get to the collection of books. I'm doing things a little bit differently today. Some of these books that I'm sharing, I have read myself. Some of these books are on my personal TBR list this week in an effort to celebrate and share them widely on social media in order to get the word out. Now, as a reminder, I'm not a therapist. I'm a woman, a daughter, a mother, someone who's trying to better understand. So if you need more help than just some developmental bibliotherapy can provide, contact whoever you need to contact. And I will put notes and numbers and links in the show notes for that. But if you're here today to learn, to explore what an eating disorder might look like, to explore what it might feel like, to get support, to learn how to better support someone with it, these are the books that I think can do that. And I've grouped them into categories. I have one category that is a realistic fiction category, where it gives you a very realistic and often scary view of what an eating disorder is like. Then I've got a couple of graphic novels that do the same thing, but offer readers a different way in through pictures and images rather than text. My next collection is a couple of books that are focused on the family and what an eating disorder does to a family structure and how families can help. Then I move into some books that are memoirs, firsthand accounts of people who have had eating disorder in an effort to share their story and help someone else. My next set is a group of nonfiction texts that explore the idea of eating disorders from a very scientific space. And then I end with a couple of books that are a little bit eclectic, middle grade books that just address body image and kind of push the boundaries of what we might think about eating disorders. So I've got a lot of books, so I am not going to talk in depth about each of them because this would be an incredibly long episode, but I do want to talk about them in groups, read a little bit about the summary, the blurb on there for those that are on my TBR list, and just hopefully generate a conversation of all of the books that are out there. And I'm only touching the tip of the iceberg here. There are so many books on this topic, from memoirs and nonfiction to realistic fiction to self-help books. So many out there that I couldn't possibly read them all, but these are the ones that seem to be impacting me personally and my journey, especially for this week, the most. Okay, so let's get to the first set of books. The first set is a collection of 3 young adult realistic fiction novels. Now, what do these books do? They give readers a realistic, and I will be honest, often horrifying glimpse into what having an eating disorder actually feels like. So when we talk about trigger warnings in books, every single one of these books is full of trigger warnings. Eating disorder triggers, depression triggers, anxiety triggers, abuse triggers, trauma triggers, all of them, right? I told you this is a serious topic today, but these books give us a new perspective. For someone with an eating disorder, it helps them feel seen. It gives them hope that there are others out there dealing with this, and guess what? They move past it too. Now, I won't lie, some of these books offer a more positive view into recovery than others. So, for example, Paperweight by Meg Haston. This is an incredibly powerful book about 17-year-old Stevie, who ends up in a residential eating disorder program in the New Mexico desert. Now, she plans to be there. Well, her family had planned her to be there for 60 days of treatment. But what no one knows is Stevie doesn't plan to stay that long. No, she isn't going to try to escape. She isn't going to try to recover to get out. She plans on committing suicide to match the date of her brother's death, which was a trigger for an eating disorder. So as you'll see in all these books, they give you a glimpse into what an eating disorder is like, but they also give you a glimpse into possibly where it came from, right? These are big books. So Paperweight by Meg Halston. What I Lost by Alexandra Ballard. This is another fiction book about 16-year-old Elizabeth, who finds herself in a residential treatment center trying to figure out how this all has came to be. And in this book, we dive more into the family dynamics. Where does an eating disorder come from? Is it genetic? Is it social? Is it social media? Is it friends? Is it family? Is it all the things? And in the end, does it really matter how, as long as the entire family is getting support? So this is What I Lost by Alexandra Ballard, and it was a debut novel for her, and it was incredibly powerful. Now, the third one in this collection, oh, this one has gotten a lot of press online. And some people get very triggered just by the mention of the title of it. That's Winter Girls by Lori Halsey Anderson, right? She writes some pretty powerful books, and this one is no exception. And in this book, we learn about Leah and Cassie. They are best friends, winter girls, frozen in fragile bodies, and they are actually competing to see who can be the thinnest. When one of them loses her life, the other is left behind, is haunted, is feeling guilty, and is struggling to recover. So this one is big. And this one shows the hopeful aspects of recovery, but also the devastating effects of what happens if an eating disorder continues. And I know we all like books to be hopeful and we like them to be full circle, but these books are realistic fiction for a reason. And it really shows those frightening statistics that I started sharing at the top of the episode. But these books are mirrors. These books are windows. And these books certainly are sliding glass doors for those that are supporting them. Because when you read stories like this, you can't help but figure out, how can you help that person? What is something that you could do, whether it's personal or it's just global for all of mankind everywhere? These books force you to think about your perspective, your beliefs about food, about eating, disordered eating, eating disorders, the people that you love. And it gives you a shockingly new perspective to think about it from. So 3 powerful young adult books: Paperweight by Meg Haston, What I Lost by Alexandra Ballard, and Winter Girls by Lori Halsey Anderson. Now, moving on from the young adult fiction selection, I do want to share 2 graphic novels that pretty much accomplish the same thing. But if readers want a different modality, they want that visualization, they want to see it, they want to feel it, they want to imagine it, then these 2 books are for you. The first one is Lighter Than My Shadow by Katie Green. Now, this is a giant book. Like, when you look at this book, you don't think graphic novel, you think textbook, because she has literally taken readers on the journey of her eating disorder from the very beginning, from the very roots of her childhood, all the way to her adult years post-recovery. It is a journey that you go on with her, and it is incredibly powerful. And as I mentioned, eating disorders often co-articulate with a lot of other things, and you'll see a lot of other things in this book that impacted her eating disorder. But there is just something so incredibly powerful about this book. It is written completely as a graphic novel, completely in black, gray, and white, and you feel what's happening. You feel it. You see what someone might be feeling on the inside that has an eating disorder. You see how the families and the friends around that person are trying to support her and how that's actually portrayed. That's what I found most powerful about this book. Yes, I got a glimpse into what it must be like to have an eating disorder, but I also got a glimpse into what that person with an eating disorder thinks and feels when others on the outside try to help, when that help isn't construed as help, and how that might be taken. So this, for me, was an incredibly powerful one, especially because of the graphic novel nature. Now, the second graphic novel is called Ink in Water by Lacey J. Davis, an illustrated memoir, or How I Kicked Anorexia's Ass and Embraced Body Positivity. Right? So this book has been called a visceral and groundbreaking graphic memoir of a young woman's devastating struggle with negative body image and eating disorders, and how she rose above her own destructive behaviors and feelings of inadequacy to live a life of strength and empowerment. So, like Lighter Than My Shadow, it is illustrated and graphic, and it just seems to put us right into the book. And this talks about her journey from start to finish with a different lens. So it talks about anorexia, it talks about bulimia, it talks about overeating. There's a lot of different things in here. And this book has gotten a lot of wonderful reviews. And what I love for it is that last piece, how she rose above to live a life of strength and empowerment. It shows that that recovery is possible in a very graphic way, right? We don't need words to feel the experiences that these characters are having. Now, moving on to books that focus not just on the individual with the eating disorder, but the family around it and those that are seeking to support them. So this first one, this is a book published back in 2011. So it is a little bit dated, if we could say that 2011 is long ago, but it's called Brave Girl Eating, a Family's Struggle with Anorexia. And in Brave Girl Eating, the chronicle of a family's struggle with anorexia nervosa, journalist, professor, and author Harriet Brown recounts in mesmerizing and horrifying detail her daughter Kitty's journey from near starvation to renewed health. Brave Girl Eating is an intimate, shocking, compelling, and ultimately uplifting look at the ravages of a mental illness that affects more than 18 million Americans. Now, I want you to think about that statistic for a minute. Back in 2011, it was 18 million Americans. More recent statistics have us only almost at 30 million Americans. But this book gives us a wider view of how an eating disorder doesn't just affect the person with the eating disorder, but the whole entire family structure around it. And I think Brave Girl Eating shows that the person with the eating disorder is certainly brave, but so is the family for doing whatever they need to do to support him or her. Now, the next one is similar, but it focuses on a mother's struggle to free her teenage son from anorexia. I will say that from my exploration into these books, most of them are focused on women. This is one that is focused on a teenage son, but also brings in the family view. It's called Please Eat, a mother's struggle to free her teenage son from anorexia by Bev Maddox, and this was published back in 2013 as well. I like this book, and by like, that's a funny word, right? Because I hate that these books have to be available, but I do like that it is focused on teenage boys rather than only girls, in addition to giving us a glimpse into the whole family sequence. So publishers have said that this book is a mother's heartbreaking yet inspirational account of how she watched helplessly as her son transformed into someone she didn't recognize physically and mentally. It also describes how, with the help of his parents and therapists, and through his own determination, Ben slowly began to cover and rebuild his life. So we have a hopeful story. We have a story where we're focusing not just on women, and we have the entire family experience in these books. Now, I also want to share two books that are memoirs. Right. So far, I have shared books, at least the realistic fiction books, that are fiction stories. But so many authors have written these stories based on their own experiences. And these two particular books are actual memoirs. The first one is Believerexic. And I want to read you the opening piece from the publisher so that you can understand what a believerexic is. Jennifer can't go on like this, binging, purging, starving, and all the while trying to appear like she's got it all together. But when she finally confesses her secret to her parents and is hospitalized at the Samuel Tuke Center, her journey is only beginning. As Jennifer progresses through her treatment, she learns to recognize her relationship with food and friends and family and how each is healthy or unhealthy. She has to learn to trust herself and her own instincts, but that's easier than it sounds. She has to believe after many years of being a believerexic, right? So it's got a different spin, which I think is very inspiring. J.J. Johnson tells the story based on her own experience of when she was hospitalized as a teenager. And what I really, truly enjoyed was the innovative format. There is blank verse, there's prose, there are changes in tense and voice and forms. It's part workbook. There are journal entries, kind of mirroring Jennifer's progress toward recovery. So it's got something different than the other books have. And I always love books that really shake up the format and give us something new to think about as a reader. And Believer Rexic definitely does that. Now, the other book that is a memoir that I think is quite powerful is Elena Vanishing. This is the story of 17-year-old Elena, whose armor against anxiety becomes artillery against herself. That's just such a powerful phrase the publisher used. Whose armor against anxiety becomes artillery against herself as she battles on both sides of a lose-lose war in a struggle with anorexia. Told entirely from Elena's perspective and co-written with her mother, Elena's memoir is a fascinating and intimate look at a deadly disease and a must-read for anyone who knows someone suffering from an eating disorder. This one went to my heart because it was written by a mother-daughter pair. It shows those connections, it shows those bonds, and it shows the way out into recovery as well. I imagine someone who is struggling with an eating disorder can truly appreciate these memoirs where they have seen people come out on the other side, even if it feels as impossible as it feels in that very moment. Now, let's move on to some nonfiction texts, some personal development texts, some books that actually explore eating disorders from a scientific or logical perspective. I've got 3 books to share. The first is called French Toast for Breakfast by Marianne Cohen. The second is called Intuitive Eating by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. And the third is Befriending Your Body by Anne Safi Biasetti. All 3 of these books are informative, all from a slightly different view. Befriending Your Body is a book written by a therapist who battled and recovered from an eating disorder in her childhood. And so she gives a glimpse on the personal experience as well as what she has learned from all of her years as a therapist to give us a framework for recovery. Intuitive eating is less about an eating disorder and more about helping the entire population as a whole have a better relationship with food and their body. And French Toast for Breakfast does something similar, although it is more focused on eating disorders, what they are, where they came from, what we can do about it, and how we move forward. So if you're looking for a book to give you some concrete information to hang on to, whether that's to learn about the disorder for someone that you love, or to support someone, or to just learn more, these 3 books will do just that for you. Depending on what your purpose is and depending on what you're looking for, there's something a little bit different in each of them that will just arm us all with information that can bring people power. Now, I want to end with just a couple more books. There are 4, it looks like, maybe 5, I don't know. And this part does kind of make me sad because these are books that are books on eating disorders that are specifically written for a middle grade audience. Young children, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. And it breaks my heart that books on body image and disordered eating and eating disorders and all of the things need to be written for this particular age group, but they do, because they're dealing with it. Eating disorders don't just start when you're 16 or 17 or when you're an adult based on some of these books that we've recommended. It has roots much earlier than that. And if we can provide support much earlier than that, hopefully we can impact someone's recovery. So I do have 2 middle grade books that I want to share with you. The first one is Good Enough by Jen Petro Roy. So this, as I mentioned, is a middle grade novel, and it's about 12-year-old Riley. Before the eating disorder, she was lots of things: an artist, a runner, a sister, and a friend, but she ends up finding herself in an inpatient treatment disorder where she feels like everything is just gone. She feels alienated from her friends, abandoned by her art, doesn't feel like her family trusts her. And this is a story of her recovery. So most of the books, as I mentioned, have been 16, 17-year-olds. This is a 12-year-old who is going through the same experience. So it certainly gives you a different view. And it's a moving story about a girl who's literally fighting for her life. Now, connected to that is the second book I want to recommend, which is You Are Enough. And that is a guide to, a guide to body image and eating disorder recovery. So it is for a young person, just like the middle grade novel that she wrote is, but it is more of a nonfiction slash workbook slash we got this. We can do something about this. Now, it certainly isn't enough by itself. All people with eating disorders deserve all sorts of intensive support, whatever that looks like for them. But this guide is a start, and it's a nice companion to the Good Enough novel. Now, I also want to recommend Starfish by Lisa Phipps. This is, I would say, middle grade moving into a YA novel that is completely written in verse. And it isn't about someone with an eating disorder, but it is about someone who struggles with her body image and accepting herself. And she struggles with it internally, but that's because of all the outside factors that are also doing it for her, like the bullies at school, like the bullies in her own family, like the world messages that she's receiving from social media. And this is a heartfelt, lyrical story of that journey and what happens in the process. It's a beautiful book, Starfish by Lisa Phipps. Now, one more I want to recommend is All of Me by Chris Barron. This has gotten such a lot of critical acclaim, and I'm recommending it because it is about a boy. Again, so many of these books are focused on girls and women, but that's not the only part of the population impacted by eating disorders. And so this is a story of Ari, who has lots of body weight images, and he's just tired of it. He's tired of letting his weight define him. His family ends up moving across the country. His parents are working a lot. The mom needs lots of space for her art. The dad has gone on lots of sales trips, and he's just kind of left to his own devices. He's trying to make friends, but he's also being very bullied by his weight. And Ari's mom thinks she's being helpful and suggests that he goes on a diet and gives him a book to help. But a book, a diet, right? It can't fix everything. And as Ari is facing all of this, including the downfall of his parents' marriage, he feels himself changing. Emotionally, yes. Physically, yes. And essentially, this is a story about accepting all the imperfect things that go on in our life. So not specifically focused on an eating disorder, but on body image and all of the things that kids might be dealing with that can influence how they feel. Now, I do have one more that I want to leave you with, and this one is on my personal TBR. I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette Purdy. Now, I know that title is so jarring, and I haven't read it yet, so I can't give you all of the inside details, but I do know that Jeanette struggled with an eating disorder herself. And from what I'm hearing, her family was less than supportive in moving her towards recovery. So this is a book that I am eager to read, along with all of the other story. If you don't know Jeanette Purdy, she was on the popular Disney show, I believe it was iCarly. Gosh, it's been a long time since I watched that with my kids. We made spaghetti tacos from iCarly. But anyway, that book is on my TBR list, and I'm kind of slating it in the memoir section because it is a memoir, but it gives us a glimpse into eating disorders and all of the webs that are entangled with it. So that's what I'll be reading next. And that brings me to the end of my collection. And, you might be feeling heavy and somber, right? Feeling all of these books that I've read today. As I mentioned, it's not a whimsical topic for the week, but think about this. Those 30 plus million Americans who are carrying this kind of heaviness and somberness around inside of them. and all of those people who are doing whatever they can to support those people, we need these books. They need to feel seen. They need to feel less alone. They need to feel understood. They need to feel supported. And most important, they need to feel hopeful, right? So this week, the whole world is coming together to root for everyone who has struggled with an eating disorder and the people who care for them. And it's my hope that adding this collection of books to the podcast and to the world will help people feel seen, feel less alone, and feel more empowered over this very challenging mental illness. So I'm going to leave you with a challenge for the week. How could you join in and help this fight? How could you contribute during this very important week of national awareness? Could you post something on social media? Could you repost or tweet or like or share a post that has been shared from the National Awareness Association? Could you donate money to the cause? Could you read one of these books and pass it along to someone you think who needs it? Could you text a loved one who you care about and just let them know you're thinking of them and supporting them, whether they have an eating disorder or not? Or maybe you just sit in the quiet for a little bit after listening to this podcast and think about your own beliefs about disordered eating and eating disordered and how it's connected to your life in some way and how you might be able to either get support or give it to someone who needs it. So a very serious connection to our reading life this week, but one that I think is needed. Even though these books have not been the most uplifting, they have been the most powerful. And I'm hoping if you have your own set of powerful books that you recommend around this topic, I'm truly hoping that you will share them with me. You can tag me on social media in a public post. You could DM or message me if you'd rather send a book privately. And as always, there are the show notes for this episode at alitlife.com. I do hope this episode broadened your awareness for what hopefully the world is focusing on this week. I hope it brought you some books that might bring some comfort or at least bring a new perspective. And again, I'm hoping you'll share some of those books that you have with me as well. And don't worry, we'll get back to some whimsical reading and writing life topics soon, but this one was important to share, and I truly appreciate you listening. So see you in the next episode, everyone. Thanks for listening and happy reading. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing lives, like bonus podcast episodes, book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking challenges, live events, giveaways, and much more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all the previous content too. You can learn more at getliterate.co. But one more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish and notebookish community too. Thanks so much for listening.